Dude, why don't you do some medical testing? Some of them can pay pretty good. My best friend Harold said to me one day. I had just been complaining about how expensive my most recent car repairs were going to be. Being the friend who always holds up a light and hands tools to whoever is working on a car and never actually trusting myself to do any of the work had finally caught up with me, and the shop my Honda was currently at was charging me $800. Don't you have to be, like, healthy to do that? I asked. I remember scrolling through Craigslist ads looking for anyone desperate enough to post a gig on there and hopefully make some quick cash. I was almost to the point of writing a high schooler's English paper for $20. Nah man, they have tests going on for everything. Some for smokers. Harold coughed after hitting the joint we were passing between each other. Some for non-smokers, health nuts, couch potatoes, you name it. And there's something out there they can test on you. After another coughing fit, he handed me the rapidly burning joint. And they don't drug test or anything. Some do. If you fit specific criteria, there are some that pay big bucks. He said as I hit the joint. I coughed before responding to him. This was some really strong stuff. And how are you suddenly the vast well of knowledge on medical testing? He smiled. How do you think I'm suddenly able to buy this dank weed? He was right. Harold was the type of person to buy the cheapest stuff imaginable, but in the last month his tastes had gotten better. I thought about it for a second, and realized he hadn't complained about his lack of money for the past couple of months. Since our senior year of high school, he always needed help buying his concert tickets, buying his weed, paying his water bill, anything that costs more than $20. He always seemed to need help with, but he wasn't now. Hell, he had bought the weed we were smoking by himself. And judging by the strength of my current high, it was some damn good stuff. What the hell, I thought. There were worse things I could do for money. Harold drove me down to the nondescript medical building on the edge of city center and parked in the 3-story concrete parking structure next to it. Are you sure I'll find something? Without the high from last night calming me, I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get my car fixed before the pizza place I delivered for hired someone to replace me. No worries, man. They're doing a lot of stuff in there. Besides, I get a bonus if I refer someone that gets picked. He gave a big smile toward me. If there was anything I could trust in the world, it would be Harold funding his consistent weed habit. If you think so, I said. We both stepped out of the car, took the elevator down to the first floor, and walked to the entrance of the cream-colored building. It was much more inside than it looked like outside. A large sheer white bottom floor with lots of open space, and a seating area with 8 comfy-looking chairs next to the receptionist desk. A young woman sat behind it on a headset, speaking into the small microphone hanging in front of her mouth. Harold walked straight up to the front desk and smiled at the receptionist. Before he could speak, she lifted a finger in the universal sign of 1 second please, without moving her eyes from the computer screen behind her desk. Of course, Dr. Brown. I'll let them know right away. She reached behind the desk someone and looked up. Sorry about that. How can I help you? Oh, hi Harold. Hey Steph, she sighed. Harold, I've told you 2 times before I'm not interested. Harold interrupted her. I'm not here to ask you out again, I promise. I'm here to bring a referral. He pointed his thumb behind him at me. I smiled and waved my hand. I could see why Harold had tried to ask her out. She was pretty damn cute. Her frown turned into a small, upturned smile. Of course. Can I get your name, please? I walked up the desk and looked at her politely. Richard Pinsky. She typed for a second before saying anything. I'm just going to print some forms for you here that you're going to need to fill out. She stopped typing and reached under the desk. I caught Harold sneaking a peek at the brief flash of her cleavage before she leaned back up with a small stack of papers and a clipboard. Here you go, Richard. Harold, why don't you go sit with him and help him fill them out? Stephanie glared at him, her dissatisfaction toward his previous advances plain as day on her face. She clipped the papers to the clipboard and pointed as politely as one could point at the seating area. We both sat, and I looked at the front pages. The first couple of pages were the usual thing you would expect at any doctor's office. Weight, age, lists of bad and good habits, list of allergies, none, medications, none, and of course the questions that I dreaded filling in on any doctor's form. Family history. This always got awkward because while I wasn't diagnosed with anything, there was always the slight possibility my genetics could suddenly kick in. Half of my mom's side of the family has either schizophrenia or depression, and my dad's side of the family is ridiculously prone to cancer and diabetes. I wasn't even comfortable talking to Harold about this type of stuff, especially the schizophrenia. I took a second before looking at the list and checking off family history. I really needed this money. I needed my car fixed, and I needed to get back to work as soon as possible if I was going to pay my rent on time. I sighed and checked off diabetes and several different types of cancer that my extended family had over the years. I made sure to not check off depression, bipolar, or schizophrenia. No need to worry, man. Cancer and diabetes are pretty common things. I'm sure it won't hurt your chances too bad, Harold said. He was leaning in his seat and looking at the clipboard in my lap. You're making this uncomfortable, man. I'm having enough trouble filling this shit out as it is. Could you not look so eager for your referral bonus? I said. Sorry, just thought I could help out. He leaned back into his seat and took his phone out of his pocket. I turned the page over and looked at the next one. What the shit? It was a couple giant blocks of dense text that was such a small print I could barely make it out. The easiest thing was the title of the page at the top, Medical Authorization Agreement. Hey Harold. He turned from his phone and looked at me. I thought you didn't want my help, man. Stop being a smartass and tell me what the hell this is. He looked at the paper for a full half second before laughing. That's just the authorization to perform medical exams, man. Most of it's just legalize. Basically says that they can examine you, take blood samples, shit like that. Makes sense. I found the bottom of the document where my name was printed and signed and dated the signature line like the piece of paper told me. The next page was a similar dense block of text that I could barely make out. This one had non-disclosure agreement on the top of it. This one's, I interrupted Harold. I know what an NDA is, Harold. I signed the NDA, which turned out to be the last page, and got up to give the clipboard back to the receptionist. No need. I'll inform the doctor that you're ready to go up. I sat back down and didn't know what to do while I waited, so I pulled out my phone and tried to pull up some information on the company I had just signed an NDA and consent forms for. According to their website, Dynamic Medical Machines was one of the leading companies in biomedical device design. Before I could click on any of the links, I heard a loud ding and looked up. The elevator closest to us opened and an older woman in a white lab coat stepped out. She looked in our direction and gave a wide smile. Good afternoon, Harold. Steph told me you were here with your friend. I turned and looked at him. He smiled back. You, came up in conversation. The woman arrived where we were sitting and extended her hand. I'm Dr. Brown. I'm the head of development here at DMM. I shook it. Rick, I deliver pizzas. She laughed. For such a serious-looking woman, she had a warm laugh. No need to tell us what you do. Everyone who comes for the screening process isn't here because they're successful. Harold could probably see the worried look on my face. You'll be fine, Rick. I'll be down here waiting. If you would take the elevator with me upstairs, we can get your screening process started. Dr. Brown moved aside to show the open elevator she had come through. Good luck, Harold said as the two of us walked toward the elevator. When both of us were inside, the doctor pulled a badge from her pocket and waved it in front of a scanner that was situated just under the buttons on the elevator. When the little red light on it turned green, she pressed the 3 button and the doors closed. I tried to hand the clipboard to her, but she waved her hand. I don't handle paperwork. Someone will be up there to handle it. She had her serious look on again and stood in silence as the elevator took its goddamn time getting going up 2 floors. I tried to diffuse the awkward silence. So what do you do here? She didn't remove her gaze from the door. I can't answer any of your questions before you go through intake. Processing. Either this company was a legitimate medical company or it was a slaughterhouse. The doors opened on another receptionist and another clean white room with a clean white desk. This room was much smaller, about the size of a normal doctor's office waiting room. The doctor waved her hand towards the receptionist's desk and I walked to it. "Richard," the receptionist said. I handed her the clipboard and examined each paper with a careful eye. "Everything looks in order. You can go ahead and take him back, doctor." I heard a loud buzz, and the only door in the room clicked open. The doctor was already next it and ushered me through. "Can you tell me?" I tried to ask, but Dr. Brown interrupted me. "You'll be taken through processing and testing before I can say anything. Please go in this room, sit down in the examination chair and wait for the phlebotomist. Once all of the testing is done, we can speak more," she said, opening an unmarked door that opened onto a typical looking examination room with an examination chair covered in paper. When I sat down on the chair, the doctor closed the door behind me and the tests began. A man in nurse's scrubs appeared a couple of minutes later with pre-sealed syringes and took 3 vials of blood. He was nice, but didn't offer much in the way of conversation. After he was done, he handed me a cup and moved me to a bathroom for a urine test. "Drug test," the phlebotomist answered. "Yeah, but don't worry, it's just for compatibility." "Compatibility," he sighed. I shouldn't have said anything. "Once you're done, leave the sample on top of the toilet in the marked container and return to the examination room." He closed the door behind me and I stared. Even the bathroom was a sheer white, just like the rest of the rooms he had been in so far. I don't know how they kept it as clean as they did, so I peed in the cup and left it in the marked basket on top of the toilet. I opened the door and went back into the examination room, or I tried, as the doorway was mostly blocked by a large machine on a cart. "Oh, sorry, let me get that." A small Asian man came from the side and pulled the cart out of the doorway, allowing me to get back in the examination room. As I sat down on the chair, I saw what he had been doing just out of view. He was taking what looked like a swimming cap with a bunch of electrodes on it and plugging wires that ran from the machine. He saw me staring at the machine and the swimming cap with wires coming out of it and laughed. "I'm Dr. Joe. The cap here is going to read the electrical signals from your brain as you answer some questions for me." "Like a lie detector?" I asked. "A little more complicated than a lie detector, but yes. Now if you could." He held the now fully connected cap in front of him. I sighed and pulled the damn thing on my head. I was glad at this point that I kept my hair short. I had no idea how Harold fit the snug rubber cap on his beautiful mane of hippie hair. After the cap was firmly on my head, Dr. Joe flipped a couple of switches on the machine and moved the screen toward him so I could no longer see it. "Now I'm going to ask you a series of questions and I need you to answer them as truthfully as you can. Got it?" "I guess. Can I ask why?" "Not unless you want to violate the NDA you signed." "Now," he pulled a clipboard from the cart. "Now please state your full name." "Richard Pinsky." I didn't hear sound or anything besides a small persistent hum from the large piece of machinery on the cart. Dr. Joe stared at the screen for a second before turning back to the clipboard. "All right. Do you love your parents?" That was a weird question, I guess. Screen again, then the clipboard. "Do you find children sexually attractive?" What the fuck kind of question is that? What kind of question is any of these? I'm fucking done. I reached toward my head to take off the cap, but felt a smooth hand on mine before I could. "Look, I know how weird these sound, but we need to weed out any undesirable people in our trials. You can imagine why we don't want to have any child molesters in a medical trial, right?" I thought about it. I guess that made sense if you thought about it in a certain way. "Now do you find children sexually attractive?" he asked again. I sighed. "No." He looked at the screen again. "Good. Now, if a train leaves a station in Los Angeles traveling east at 50 miles an hour and another train leaves another station in Williamsburg traveling 60 miles an hour traveling west, how long will they be on a collision course before the heat death of the universe happens?" What? I asked. How the hell was I even supposed to answer that question? It was more like a word salad than any comprehensible question that could be answered. Dr. Joe looked at the screen again. "Okay, I got what I need." He set the clipboard on the cart and pulled the cap off of my head. "That's it. I got what I needed." Dr. Brown should be back with you shortly, he said. It was almost comical how fast he opened the door and pulled the large machine and cart out of the door. He didn't even bother to unplug the hat from the machine when he had taken such care to plug it in. Dr. Brown came in about 10 minutes later. Her serious face was gone and she had a wide smile on her face. "Mr. Pinsky, I just spoke with Dr. Joe and saw the results of your test, and it looks like you have what we need." I sat, confused. "What you need?" "Your mind, more specifically your brain. You have the type we are looking for our newest implant trials." That was good, I guess. "Wait a minute, implant?" She sighed. "The trial does involve some surgery, yes, but you will be well compensated for it. Our usual package involves an initial payment of $4,000 for the surgery and $1,500 a month as long as you are in the trial." $4,000, $4,000. This was too good to be true. Not only could I get my car fixed, I wouldn't even need to work for as long as the trial was going on. "Is Harold part of this trial?" "He is, but please don't speak about the trial to him as it violates the NDA. "I get it." I interrupted her. She had interrupted me so many times about the NDA and not answering me that she deserved at least one. She laughed. Yes, I probably deserved that. But please listen to me. We are developing a device that will hopefully be able to transfer thoughts between two different people. We are calling it Project Telepathy. This was absolutely insane. A mysterious medical company that was going to pay me to put a device in my head that could transfer thoughts. But on the other hand, there was $4,000. With that kind of money, I could even pay my credit card bills down. Crazy medical company, $4,000. When would I get paid? Her face was serious when she answered, no hint of a smile on her face. "As soon as you sign the papers authorizing the surgery." I thought about it for another minute. My brother's birthday was coming up soon, and I hadn't been able to get him anything for the last couple of years. The credit card companies had sent multiple letters asking for their payments. "Where do I sign up?" I said finally. What could go wrong? It turns out, a lot. Some more paperwork signed and a trip to the bank to make sure the check they gave me didn't bounce, and I was suddenly $4,000 richer. Holy shit. I said to myself when I checked the account balance on my phone for the third time since getting home. "Told you it was legit, man." Harold chided me while I sat on my couch staring at my phone. He took a puff of the joint he'd lit after we sat down. It was obvious now, between the immaculate interiors of the building and the $4,000 check, that they were legit. Of course, being legit meant they were actually going to implant something in my head. "You're in the telepathy project too." In response, Harold tapped the back of his head between his skull and neck. "No need to worry, man. It's not actually brain surgery. The thing's about the size of a quarter with a couple of tiny wires. They install it just under the cerebellum." Cerebellum? When did the high school dropout learn anything? Harold's smile faltered for a second. He smiled again before it went into the realm of annoyance. Guess I actually paid attention for once. That little falter was odd for Harold. But now that he wasn't broke all the time, maybe he finally had some self-esteem and wouldn't take the friendly put-downs as much. Or maybe I was just being too much of a hassle. Either way, I shrugged off the odd look he had given me for half a second. Looking back on it now, I should have seen it as the first sign of something being wrong. But I'm an idiot sometimes and chose to forget about it. Our conversation didn't go much of anywhere, and after another hour or two, Harold left me in about a gram of the excellent weed he had brought with him. It was 4 o'clock. I was tired from going through all of the testing and having to wake up at 7 a.m., but it was much too late to take a nap. The car shop was glad to hear that they could finally start work on my car. My backed up cell phone bill got paid, and I made the first payment on my credit card in 6 months. The night was pretty uneventful besides catching up on episodes of the latest Marvel Netflix TV show. I tried to catch a couple of Z's but was rudely woken up by a phone call at 7 a.m. "Hello," I said groggily. "Hello, Mr. Pinsky. I'm calling from Dynamic Medical Machines." I sat up, suddenly feeling awake despite the 5 hours of sleep I had gotten. "Oh, hi, what's up?" "I'm calling to schedule your surgery." "That's quick. You guys don't waste time." The woman on the other side of the phone laughed. Time is money, Richard. We are a company that makes profit. We have a spot later in the week and one for later in the afternoon today if you're not busy. Today, why would they want to do it so quickly? The answer came to me almost as soon as I asked it. They didn't have anyone else in the study. They found something rare that they needed, and they didn't want to waste time when they finally had the thing they needed. It was nice to feel valuable for once in my life. Mr. Pinsky, are you there? Yeah, sorry. How long will the surgery be? We can't guarantee the recovery time, but it's usually an hour or two before you can go home. The implant doesn't require general anesthesia and doesn't go deep, so once it's installed, it's just a couple of stitches and some mild painkillers. The nice woman on the other end said, "How's later today then? I'll come by around 6 to pick you up if that's cool," Harold said as I stepped out the passenger side door. "Sounds good." I closed the door and watched the eternal stone wave as he drove off. Here again after a single day willing to get an implant in my head. This was either the beginning of a superhero origin story or a horror movie. I didn't quite know which yet. I stepped inside the front lobby and went directly up to the desk. Stephanie was at the front desk again. "Hey there, Mr. Pinsky. Big day already," she said before pressing a button on her phone. "I'll make sure to let Dr. Brown you're here." "No worries," I said before I went to go sit down in one of the chairs. "No need, Rick." I turned to the elevator that was closest to the waiting seats to find Dr. Brown standing in the elevator. It was the one on the opposite side from the one we had taken yesterday. "That was quick," I said before stepping into the elevator. "Any particular reason we are taking this elevator instead of the other one?" Dr. Brown took her badge and waved it in front of a scanner that beeped and turned from a glowing red to a green before she pressed the B button on the floor level. "This is the only one that goes to the basement level where the operating theater is," she said. I looked at her, suddenly worried about what I had just signed up for. She looked at my face and gave the warm smile I had enjoyed yesterday. "I know how horror movie it sounds. We are a medical company that implants devices in the basement of our faceless corporate building. I can guarantee that we are no such thing. The basement is fully staffed with the best medical equipment and personnel in the entire city. 3 recovery rooms, 2 surgeons and 4 nurses. The food comes directly from the company cafeteria upstairs, so even the food will be better than the hospital." The doors opened as she finished her rant. I opened my eyes. There was a blinding light preventing me from seeing anything, and the pain forced me to shut them again. What the hell is going on? I was just in the... I trailed off. Where the hell was I just? Stuff was fuzzy, and the back of my neck hurt. "Mr. Pinsky, glad you see you awake. How are you feeling?" I recognized the voice as Dr. Brown. "I had a headache. I have a headache." A voice from a nearby speaker somewhere said in a robot voice. "What the hell? What the hell?" The robot voice said again. "I see the implant is working." I tried to not think about what I was going to say before saying it. I didn't feel like hearing my own thoughts again coming out of a computer speaker somewhere. Why can't I remember anything? There were some ... complications, Dr. Brown said. I couldn't see it, but could imagine the worried look on her face. "There was some feedback from the implant after we connected it to your cerebellum and you lost consciousness. The surgeons and doctors were able to prevent any damage, but some memory loss is to be expected." I tried to open my eyes again. They had adjusted a bit more, and I was able to make out the hospital room I was laying in. Dr. Brown sat in a chair next to my bed, looking like she had made herself comfy hours ago. "How time is it?" I asked. I blinked a couple of times to try and make my eyes adjust to the light faster. She laughed a bit. "I can still see you're a bit disoriented. All normal, I promise. And it's 15 past 7. I looked frantically from one side of the bed to the other looking for my phone. Harold was probably still out in the waiting room looking for me. "Harold was informed of your state and sends his regards." She took something from her pocket and handed it in my direction. It was a phone. My phone. I clicked the screen open as soon as it was in my hands and I saw, "Get some rest. text from Harold on my opening screen. "How long until I get out of here?" I asked her. Dr. Brown took a clipboard that had been attached to the front of the bed and looked at it. "Everything's looking okay according to toxicology, but we want to keep you in overnight for observation." "This is fucking annoying," the speaker said again. I looked around to find the speaker was on a cart in the corner of the room. It had the machine that Dr. Joe had used but without the cap on attached to it. Dr. Brown laughed again. "I understand. There of course will be no charge for your care, and I've also been authorized to give you a small bonus for your trouble. If you want to check your account." I did. There was $1,000 extra since the last time I checked it. A little less annoying, the speak came on again. "Can we turn that damn thing off?" I asked the doctor. Of course. She got up from her seat and turned off the machine. I hadn't noticed the hum that the machine had been making until it was off and the room became blissfully quiet. Now I have some other things to take care of. The nurses are on call 24/7 stationed right outside your room. Dinner's at 9. Nice if you excuse me. Without any further explanation, she walked out of the room in a hurry. Now that Dr. Brown wasn't there to distract me, I noticed the itching on the back of my neck. I tried to feel where it was coming from, but pulled back when a small flare of pain erupted as I made contact with it. I was in the basement of a medical building in the middle of downtown. Complications from surgery required me to stay inside, and I had an implant that broadcast my thoughts to a machine that was in my room. Wait a minute. The implant was working, obviously, as I heard the machine broadcast my own thoughts, but the machine was on when I woke up. It was on when I wasn't awake. Why would it be on when I wasn't? The nurses were kind but quiet. They wouldn't even tell me their names, much less answer any question about the machine or the implant. Either they had signed NDAs as well, or they didn't know anything. I was personally leaning more towards the latter, but of course I was the idiot who volunteered to get a mysterious device implanted in my neck, so what the hell do I know? I couldn't think of anything else to do, so I pulled up the website for dynamic medical machines. Probably should have done it a couple days ago, but hey, I thought I could excuse myself considering the surgery and subsequent blackout. It was pretty typical corporate stuff, forming the future of medical implants and leading medical technology into the future, and all of the vague nonsense that a corporation puts on their website when they don't want you to know exactly what they do. They, however, did have a page with the heads of the company, and of course there was a picture of a stern woman with an oddly warm smile named Dr. Isabel Brown. And because there was nothing else to do, I looked up Dr. Brown some more. She was famous in her field. Her alma mater mentioned her by name in a review of the most well-known alumni at her school. A couple of patents in her name. She seemed to be the top-of-the-line doctor that she described everyone else as being inside this building. On the third page of the Google searches for her name, an old article popped up from an archived copy of 14 Times from 1979. Her being 15 was not the focus of the article. What was the focus of the article was her father, Dr. Patrick Brown. He was famous in his own right too. The article was describing the testing center he ran. Dr. Patrick Brown was convinced that there were psychics in the world. Real people he could find that would prove his belief that there was something more in this world. Something great and unknown that we could experience but never fully understand. Someone who could know what shape on what card you picked without actually seeing anything. The center itself was still open according to Google, although there wasn't any mention of a Dr. Patrick Brown on their website. Before I knew it, it was morning, and there was a knock on my open door. "How are you doing this morning, Mr. Pinsky?" Dr. Brown said from the doorway. I yawned. "Couldn't sleep. To be expected since you woke up at 6 p.m. yesterday. Is there any itching or soreness?" "A bit. Whatever the nurses gave me helped out a lot," I said. There was in fact a bit of soreness, but painkillers are a hell of a drug. "Glad to hear it. You feeling up for some testing of the implant?" she asked. I noticed she had a clipboard in her hand. Of course she didn't care about how I felt. She just wanted to test if her precious implant was working correctly. "Doesn't Dr. Joe do the testing?" she scoffed. I designed the damn receivers, I can handle the damn machine. She moved over to the cart and swiveled it around. This was the very first time I had seen the screen attached to the machine that could apparently read my thoughts. It was underwhelming when I only saw the normal desktop of a Windows computer. She clicked a couple icons that were unrecognizable and a screen popped up. The closest thing I could compare it to would be an audio editing program. We're going to start the tests with a simple association game. I'm going to say a word and you don't have to do anything except think about saying something. Sound good? Sure. She clicked a couple of buttons on the large machine the computer was connected to. A couple lights blinked on and the humming that I was somehow getting used to, and she started speaking. Father, asshole. My father is an asshole. Asshole. A computerized voice said from the speaker attached to the machine. It was just as unsettling as before to hear my thoughts come out of a speaker. How did it know what to speak and what not to? How did it part just the word asshole from what I was thinking? Job, the doctor said. I was a delivery driver for a pizza place. My job doesn't matter. Pointless, the speaker said to the doctor. I hadn't actually thought that word. At least I hadn't thought that I thought it. What is it about thinking about thoughts that make you think in circles? Circles. Thoughts and thoughts about circles. Circular shapes, things. A bright light and a loud sound, and Dr. Brown's face was in front of mine. She was shining a light in my face. Good, you're back in the land of the living. I was dead. I asked in a fog. No, of course not. Now if you can follow the light. She waved the light in front of his face, and I did the best I could, tracking the light. It seemed worthy and Dr. Brown put the light in her pocket. The implant was sending feedback back into your cerebellum. It seems to have stopped for now, but I think we are done with testing for today. She walked over to the machine, flipped a couple of switches, pressed a couple of buttons, and the hum disappeared. There was something odd there, but I couldn't tell what it was. There was something I was missing, the doctor continued. And considering the continuing problems with the implant, I'm going to suggest keeping you here until we can figure out what's going on. Keep me here. If it's okay, I'd really like to go home. I feel like it would help. Dr. Brown looked at me. Any kindness that was present on her face just a few moments ago fled her face, and she gave me the same stern look that she had in that elevator the first time I met her. I'm very sorry to do this, Richard, but as the head doctor here, I'm enforcing the medical contract you signed. The technical term is medical quarantine. I looked at her. She was keeping me here, against my will. I reached for my phone as soon as Dr. Brown left the room. I had thought that if I didn't complain about the medical quarantine that I could call the police and get my ass out of here. No luck, of course. Sometime between Dr. Brown coming in and leaving, they had done something to the Wi-Fi, and of course I didn't get a signal in the basement. I no longer had communication to the outside world. What the fuck had I gotten myself into? I tried asking the nurse when they came in about the feedback problem that Dr. Brown had mentioned, and just like before, they were courteous but silent on any specifics. And of course there were the complications from the implant itself. Besides the pain and soreness, there were bouts of vertigo followed by that strange, circular thinking that had happened during the morning test. The third time it happened, I came back to consciousness to find the TV on the other side of the wall, tuned to the Fox Business channel. So not only was I losing time, but I was doing things during the lost time. My biggest question at that point was why I felt the need to watch Fox Business. A thought entered my head, not something specific, more like a need, a desperate desire for stimulation of some type. Even if that stimulation was only the dulcet tones of the news anchor blathering on and on about some company or another and how it was trading over the past couple of days. Hey, a voice from the doorway said. I looked up to find Dr. Joe. I'm here to check up on the implant site. Is now a good time? I nodded, not doing much else, unless you count watching green and red arrows. Dr. Joe laughed. Glad to see you in a good mood. He stepped inside the room and took out a tiny flashlight the same size as the one Dr. Brown had used earlier. I tried to ignore the pain in my neck and I turned enough to show him. He stuck his head close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck, and I heard a small click as the flashlight turned on. Everything's looking good, Daniel. Incision is healing up nice. Let me just fire up the receiver and we'll see if the signal is clear. He moved from the bed towards the machine on the cart. Rick, I said to him. My name is Rick. He stopped in his tracks and looked at me. He had this look on his face for just a second, a look that told me, along with everything else that had been happening, that something had gone wrong. The look disappeared, and the man smiled. Of course, my mind's a bit preoccupied today. He turned on the machine and I could hear the hum again. He started asking the same type of weird questions he had when he put the cap on me during our initial testing. Are you sexually attracted to children? The speaker on the cart piped up before I could answer. Of course not, you slant-eyed chink. I audibly gasped. I'm so sorry. Dr. Joe didn't seem fazed. No worries, I'm sure. He raised his voice as if he wanted someone else to hear. That was said only in anger at what Rick is going through. I thought to myself for the umpteenth time today about what the hell I had gotten myself into. When all this was over, I was definitely asking for more money. Now, if a train leaves... I blinked. Dr. Joe wasn't in the room. It had happened again. I lost another chunk of time, and the TV was on again. This was getting ridiculous. I picked up my phone from where I placed it on the side table next to my bed. If any more of this lost time shit was going to happen again, I was going to record it. Thankfully, I already had a voice recording app on my phone, so the next time either doctor came to do their tests, I was going to be ready. My opportunity came later in the day around 7 p.m. Or was it the next day? Even with my phone clock, it had been hard to keep track whether I'd been here for 2 days or just one. How are you feeling, Mr. Pinsky? It was Dr. Brown again. Surreptitiously as possible, I changed the screen of my phone from a game to the voice recorder and I pressed the big red button. Feeling okay. Swelling is going down according to Dr. Joe. Good to hear. I heard you've been having more feedback problems, she asked. She had not lost the serious face since she had told me that I was stuck down here. If that's what Dr. Joe said, then sure. My voice dropped with more venom than I intended. It was getting harder and harder to hide my annoyance and anger with her. She ignored me and went to the machine. It was still on from the last time Dr. Joe had been in here, so she just clicked a couple of buttons and started moving the mouse around. I'm going to do a couple more tests to see if... He interrupted her. To see if the receiver is working. I get it. Just do what you need to do. I'm not going anywhere. She sighed and her face softened a bit. Rick, this situation isn't ideal for any of us. I know it's a lot to ask for, but could you please try and not be... I blinked. The hum of the machine was silent and Dr. Brown was no longer in the room. Reality came crashing back and I reached for my phone on the bedside table. It was 7:47 p.m. and the voice recorder was still running. I stopped the recording at 43 minutes. Hopefully my little trick would help me to understand what was going on. It answered my questions. Too many of them. I skipped the first minute and started playing just as Dr. Brown was saying, "You could please try and not be so angry. We will hopefully figure out what's going on soon." The voice that answered her was the computer-generated voice from the speaker on the cart. When are you and the goddamn chink doctor going to figure out what the hell is going on? Daniel, good. That means the new algorithm Dr. Joe slapped together is working, Dr. Brown said from the voice recorder. Great. I can speak to you through a goddamn computer whenever I want. When are you going to figure out what the hell went wrong and give me at the very least a time frame for when I can take control of my new body? The compy? I have no access whatsoever. I can't even keep track of what time it is outside of these conversations when you decide to fire up the machine. The blackouts I've been having aren't just losses in my memory. Daniel can't remember them either. I was, or he was, obviously doing something during the blackouts that neither of us could remember. I didn't have an explanation for it, as I was less versed on whatever was going on than even Daniel. But the only time Daniel could speak to them is when they turn on the machine. The only time he could even keep track of is when the machine is on. I looked over at the machine in the corner. It was off. I looked back at the phone in my hand. I had a decision to make right now. I didn't know when Dr. Joe or Dr. Brown or any of the nurses would show up. If any of them heard the recording, they would probably take the phone and the charger it was connected to, and I would be shit out of luck. If I decided to turn on the machine and try to talk to Daniel with the information I had, I wouldn't have much time to try and get him to get us out of here. I didn't even know if there was anything I could say to him that would get him to expend his incredible resources to get me out of here, but my circumstances dictated desperation. So the real question I had to ask myself was, can you threaten a ghost with death? A knock at the door. Hey buddy, how's it going? Harold. Or at least it was Harold's body and Harold's voice and Harold's hair. It was even Harold's smile, but I had to remember that it wasn't Harold in there. Could be better, honestly. I keep having these blackouts, and they can't figure out what the hell is going on. I stopped for a second, suddenly thinking of an idea. I don't think Dr. Brown knows exactly what she's doing. I looked closely at Harold when I mentioned Dr. Brown. There was the slightest hint of annoyance before the smile returned. If I hadn't been paying close attention, I probably would have missed it, and that did it. The very last hope that Harold was anywhere in there was finally gone. I'm sure they're doing everything they can. She was always super nice when I was here. If there's something wrong, I'm sure they will figure it out soon. Dr. Brown's son, Harold, said, now that I knew the truth, every second I talked to him was torture. Every second this thing pretended to be my friend. Every single second it filed through my friend's memories and did its best to pretend to be my best friend. Do you think they have any cameras or anything in here? I asked him. In the room here. Do you think they put any cameras or have any mics in here or anything? He looked around, doing a pretty good facsimile of someone who was unfamiliar with where he was. I don't see any, but I would be surprised if this place didn't have cameras up the wazoo. Why do you ask? I thought for a second. I really needed him close enough to whisper something that a camera wouldn't pick up. I was wondering something about, I made a quick mime of hitting a joint with my fingers. He laughed. Dude, they did a drug test. They know more about you than you do. Shit, I'm sure they do. I just need to ask you something and I don't want the camera to pick it up. He sighed. Fine, dude, but I don't see what the big fuss is about. He stepped closer to the bed and put his ear close to my head. I turned and covered my mouth to whisper in his ear. Don't let her know, but I know who you are. When I move my head back and stop whispering, you are going to make some excuse to leave. And if you let your mother or anyone else know that I know who you are, then the second I get a chance, I'm going to rip this implant out of my neck, and your mother's precious project will lose all of its funding. Got it? I pulled my mouth from his ear and looked at him. He turned his head slightly, and I could see the staring eyes of someone who definitely wasn't Harold. I didn't know if he would take my threat of ripping out the implant seriously, but at this point could only hope that he would. I didn't know if I could even do what I said. Sure, dude, he said in Harold's voice, but I could see behind the eyes now. There was nothing of my friend. Memories and mannerisms, yes, but nothing of my actual friend. So yeah, I was hoping you could grab that stuff from my apartment. Sound cool, man? I asked him. Sure, man, sure. Anything else I could grab for you while I'm there? I thought for a second. A pair of pants maybe. They haven't given me back the pair I had when I came in here, and it's getting a bit drafty. He stared. Of course. Should I go now? I nodded. Yeah, it's getting weird not wearing pants in front of other people. Harold left. But of course he wasn't Harold. I had to make sure to remember that. However I managed to do it, Dr. Brown's son was listening to me for now, and I needed to do something with that. Maybe Daniel could help out. I stared at the machine in the corner of the room. How was I supposed to talk to Daniel without going into whatever blackout they put me into? I thought back to the experiments they had performed on me so far. They had done something on the computer and turned on the receiver somehow. Then of course everything went black and I couldn't remember anything. Except I didn't black out every single time. There were the tests at the beginning when the speaker just shouted out what I was thinking. Not exactly what I was thinking, but just a general idea of what I was thinking. That could have been Daniel, or at least a piece of Daniel that was coherent enough to speak and interpret my thoughts. Just a day ago I was wondering how to spend my money, and now I have to figure out how to work a goddamn mind-reading machine. Or maybe it was 2 days ago. It was hard to keep track when there was no sunlight. and blacking out every 30 seconds. I grabbed my phone from the side table. 10:07 p.m. The nurses had already brought dinner, and unless I summoned them for some reason, they had no reason to come. Dr. Brown had never shown up later than 7 p.m., and I'd only ever seen Dr. Joe once since coming down here. Fuck it. I got up out of bed and tried to stand up. I was dizzy for a moment as the blood rushed from my head to the rest of my body. I had to grasp the bed and steady myself for a moment before I could finally hold myself up. After another minute, the dizziness stopped and I was able to stand on my own. The machine stood in the corner of the room. I had seen Dr. Brown turn on the machine more than once, so I flipped the switches. I remembered her flipping and started up the screen. The machine turned on and began humming in that all too familiar way. The screen showed a couple of different programs on the screen, and unfortunately I had no idea which one was the program Dr. Brown had opened to allow Daniel to be heard through the speaker. I didn't know what to do and just decided to try each one. I had a bit of time for trial and error, so I opened the first program that was listed, and for once in my life I had a bit of luck on my side, and the audio editing looking program opened on the first try. I tried clicking around the program looking at the drop down menus, having no idea what anything did, before I saw a recently opened section with a list of 2 different files. One of the files was a random looking string of numbers and letters, but the other was clearly named Daniel. Well, that was pretty damn convenient. I opened the Daniel file and the various lines on the screen began to move and the hum of the machine got louder. The speaker crackled to life. "Is that you again, Dr. Brown?" He was there. The man who paid a lot of money to steal my body, my life, and my youth was speaking to me right now. Neither of us were in a good position. Both of us were stuck down here with a malfunctioning piece of machinery, and no one could figure out what the hell was going on. Both of us were in trouble as long as we stayed here. Mr. Warburton, we have a lot to talk about. Thank you to my super fans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacey, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.